She had always loved music, ever since she was a little girl. Even as a child, she would sit by the old piano at home, her small fingers hesitating over the keys, trying to make the sounds match what she imagined in her head. There was something about music that made her feel alive, something that made the world around her seem softer, gentler, and more full of possibilities. Life could be loud, messy, and confusing, but when she played, it felt like the world paused for a moment just for her. That feeling had stayed with her through the years. Now, she was older, sitting in a crowded concert hall. The room buzzed with conversation, with people shuffling in their seats and whispering to one another. Many were scrolling on their phones or checking their watches. The main performance was about to begin, and excitement mixed with impatience floated in the air. She felt a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. She was just one person among hundreds, but something inside her stirred as she looked at the grand piano on the stage. Its polished wood gleamed under the bright lights, and the keys seemed to call out to her in a quiet, persistent way. Her heart beat faster as she imagined sitting there and letting her fingers touch the keys. She thought about the music she had been working on in secret, a simple melody she had written herself. It was not complicated or impressive, but it carried all the feelings she had tucked away over the years, moments of sadness, bursts of joy, quiet hope, and the longing to be understood. She wondered what it would feel like to share it with the world, even if only for a few minutes. As she sat there, she noticed the people around her. Some were chatting without really listening. Others seemed tired, as if the day had already drained them. The room was beautiful, with high ceilings, soft lights, and the hum of excitement, but it felt distant from her own thoughts. Her own world was smaller, quieter, and full of the sounds of her imagination. She thought about what it would mean to bring those two worlds together for just a moment, to make everyone stop and listen to something real and simple. She thought about the risk of speaking up. Asking to play in a place like this was unusual, even bold. People came to concerts expecting to see professionals perform polished pieces, not someone with a simple plea to share a melody. What if they laughed, or ignored her, or someone told her to leave? The thought made her stomach twist, but it did not stop her. It only made her want it more. She wanted to see what would happen if she followed her heart. Taking a deep breath, she stood up and slowly made her way toward the stage. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she told herself that it was worth it. She could feel the eyes of a few people turning toward her as she passed, curious about what she was doing. Some whispered to their neighbors, others simply watched in silence. She approached the stage manager, a tall man with a clipboard, who looked at her with a mix of surprise and caution. She swallowed her nervousness and spoke softly, almost afraid her voice would shake. She explained that she had written a simple melody and asked if she could play it on the piano for just a few minutes before the main performance. The manager raised an eyebrow and hesitated. The audience was not expecting this, he thought. There were schedules, plans, and expectations. But she kept talking, her words quiet but steady. She didn't want to perform a long piece or show off. She only wanted to share something real, something that came from her heart. He studied her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. There was a small chance, he said, that it could work and maybe it would calm the audience before the main performance. She felt a wave of relief and gratitude. Even a small yes felt like a victory. She smiled softly, thanking him, and walked toward the piano. As she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights made her squint. The hall seemed enormous from this side of the curtain. Hundreds of people filled the seats, some unaware that she would be playing. She took a deep breath and let her fingers hover above the keys. The wood was smooth under her touch, and the first note she played felt like a message she was sending into the air. It was a simple note, gentle and unassuming, but it was enough to make her heart leap. She continued, letting the melody flow. It was not complicated or fast, but it carried the weight of her feelings. Each note was a small confession, a story she had never told anyone. She could feel the music filling the room, reaching out to the people who had not been paying attention. Some heads turned, some eyes widened, and the room began to grow quiet. The murmurs faded as her simple melody reached their ears. She could sense that something was changing in the air. Her hands moved more confidently now. She had worried that a simple tune would not matter, but it seemed to have a quiet power. The notes danced lightly, rising and falling like a gentle wave. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music guide her, and for a few minutes, the outside world disappeared. There was only her and the piano, and the melody she had brought to life. In the audience, people began to notice. The restless chatter stopped, and attention turned toward the stage. Some leaned forward, curious. Others sat back, letting the sounds wash over them. The simplicity of the music was what caught them off guard. It was not meant to impress with technical skill or dramatic flair. It was honest, gentle, and real, and that honesty touched something inside the listeners. She continued to play, her confidence growing with each note. The hall, once filled with distractions and impatience, was now quiet, as if everyone had been drawn into a shared moment. It was a rare kind of magic, one that could not be forced or rehearsed. She felt it in her chest, a warmth spreading through her body. She had made a simple plea and it was working. People were listening. The more she played, the more she realized that the courage to step forward had been the hardest part. The music itself was easy once she let go of fear. Each note, each pause, each rise and fall of the melody carried a piece of her soul into the room. And for the first time in a long time, she felt completely seen. Not in words, but in the quiet connection that music could create. She did not know how long she had been playing. Minutes felt like seconds, and the audience seemed to hold its collective breath. There were no distractions, no schedules, no expectations. Only the sound of the piano and the small, steady courage of a young woman who had chosen to share something personal. Her simple plea had become a bridge between her inner world and the outside world, and it was stronger than she had ever imagined. As she finally slowed, letting the last notes linger in the air, she felt a sense of relief and wonder. She had taken a risk and it had not been in vain. The audience, once restless and distracted, was now silent, still absorbing what they had heard. She smiled softly, feeling a quiet pride. It had been a simple plea, but it had carried a weight far beyond what she had expected. She stepped back from the piano, ready to see what would happen next, knowing that this small moment might be remembered longer than anyone expected. She had barely finished taking a breath when she realized the next step was the hardest. Sitting at the piano was one thing. Asking permission to play in front of a crowd she had never performed for was entirely another. The hall was vast, filled with people who had come for a scheduled performance, expecting polished professionals. She felt her hands tremble slightly as she approached the stage manager once again. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of curiosity and caution. She swallowed her nervousness and explained carefully that she only wanted to play a simple tune, something short and gentle to fill a small moment before the main event. She did not ask for an entire performance or to show her skill. She only wanted to share her melody, to let it float in the room for a few minutes. The manager studied her closely, raising an eyebrow. There were schedules to maintain, tickets to respect, and an audience expecting a specific program. A small interruption like this was risky. Some audience members might even complain or lose patience. Yet, he could see her sincerity, the way her hands clasped nervously in front of her, the way her eyes avoided his but carried a quiet determination. He hesitated, unsure if he should allow it. Finally, after a long pause, he nodded. He said it was unusual and it might be distracting, but if she promised to keep it brief, she could try. Relief washed over her in a sudden, warm wave. Even this small yes felt like a victory. She smiled faintly, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Walking toward the piano, the lights seemed even brighter now, and the hall felt even bigger. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and placed her fingers over the keys. The smooth surface felt familiar and comforting, like an old friend welcoming her home. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining the melody she had been carrying in her heart for so long. It was simple, but it was hers, and she hoped it could reach beyond her own mind into the minds and hearts of the audience. She pressed the first key. The sound was soft but clear, cutting through the quiet murmurs of the audience. She hesitated, letting the note linger for a moment, feeling it resonate through the wooden floor and into the room. Then she played the next note, and the next, letting the melody unfold naturally. It was not fast, not showy, not meant to impress. It was a quiet, personal expression, a little story told through sound. Her fingers moved carefully but with growing confidence, each note carrying her feelings into the air. At first, some in the audience barely noticed. Conversations continued softly. A few people glanced toward the stage, wondering who had stepped forward. But as the melody grew, as the simple, honest tune filled the space, more heads turned, more eyes widened. There was a subtle shift in the room. The restless chatter faded, replaced by a gentle attention. People leaned forward in their seats, curious. Some lowered their phones, realizing that what they were seeing and hearing was unexpected and unusual. The music was not grand or flashy, but there was an authenticity in it that demanded recognition. She felt the nerves slowly melt away. The moment she had been imagining for years, the courage to share something personal, was here. She was not performing for accolades or approval. She was performing because she could not keep the music to herself any longer. Every note carried a little piece of her story. Moments of quiet hope, memories of joy and sadness, times she had been alone with her thoughts, and the deep longing to be understood. The audience was beginning to feel it, even if they did not yet know what it was. Her simple plea was reaching them. As she continued, she noticed a few people smiling softly, some closing their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. A man in the front row tilted his head, listening intently, and a young girl clutched her mother's hand, entranced by the gentle flow of music. The hall was changing. The energy shifted from impatience to curiosity, from distraction to attention. Her simple melody was creating a shared space, a pause in the noise of life where everyone could just exist in the moment. Her confidence grew with every note. She did not need to play fast or complex patterns. The simplicity of the tune was its strength. She let her emotions guide her, letting the music rise and fall naturally. Each pause, each soft chord, each delicate touch of a key spoke more than words ever could. She was surprised by the power of something so small and unassuming, and the audience seemed to share in that surprise. It was as if they had all been waiting for a quiet moment like this, though they did not know it until now. The more she played, the more the hall seemed to respond. She felt a connection that went beyond sight or speech. People leaned forward, drawn into the story the music told. A few wiped away tears, moved by something they could not fully name. Others nodded, silently acknowledging the beauty and honesty of the moment. Even those who had been skeptical or distracted were now captivated. Her simple plea, which had felt so small and fragile, had grown into something powerful and uniting. She took a breath, her fingers hovering over the keys for a moment before continuing. The melody changed slightly, softening and becoming more reflective. She thought of all the times she had doubted herself, all the moments she had held back, all the little melodies that had lived only in her mind. Now, here they were, taking shape in the real world, reaching out to strangers in a room that had seemed so intimidating just moments ago. She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet pride that was not about recognition but about sharing herself openly, honestly, without pretense. The audience's attention became almost tangible. Every sound of the piano seemed to pull them closer, to invite them into her world. She saw people exchanging glances, smiles spreading quietly across the room. The energy was calm, yet powerful in its subtlety. Her simple plea had created a pause, a moment where everyone could breathe together and feel something beyond the ordinary. She realized that music, even in its simplest form, could speak to the deepest parts of people, transcending words and expectations. Minutes passed, though it felt like an instant. She played with care, savoring each note, letting the melody linger in the air. The hall had become quiet, almost reverent, as if everyone were holding their breath, not wanting the moment to end. She was aware of her own nervousness, but it had transformed into focus and connection. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge between her heart and the hearts of the people in front of her. She could see the shift in the room, the way people had opened up, even if only for a few minutes, to something simple and real. Finally, she brought the melody to a soft close. The last note hung in the air for a moment before fading into silence. For a heartbeat, the hall remained still, everyone absorbing the beauty of what they had just heard. Then, slowly, a wave of quiet appreciation began to spread. People shifted in their seats, some whispering softly, others nodding, still captivated by the experience. She let herself smile quietly, feeling a sense of accomplishment and relief. She had taken a risk, asked for something small, and it had been received with more warmth and attention than she could have imagined. As she stepped away from the piano, the stage manager gave a subtle nod, acknowledging her courage and the impact of her simple plea. She had not aimed for grandeur, yet the result was profound. The audience was more attentive, more present, and more aware than they had been just minutes before. She realized that sometimes it was the smallest, most honest gestures that carried the greatest power. Her music had spoken without words, and for a brief, unforgettable moment, everyone had listened. And she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of a journey she could not have imagined when she first dreamed of sitting at a piano and letting the music flow. She sat back down at the piano, her fingers poised over the keys, feeling the soft shine of the wood beneath them. The lights of the hall made the keys glimmer, and she felt a sudden surge of courage mixed with nervousness. The audience was still quiet, their attention now focused entirely on her, but she could sense their curiosity, their surprise at what she had dared to do. She took a deep breath and let her fingers move gently over the keys, starting with a familiar tune she had been working on for months. It was simple, almost fragile, but it carried the weight of her feelings. Each note seemed to float into the air, reaching out to the people who had not been paying attention moments ago. As she played, she could feel the room changing. The murmurs that had filled the hall before had disappeared completely, replaced by the soft hum of music and the quiet anticipation of the audience. People leaned forward in their seats, listening intently, some with their eyes closed, letting the melody wash over them. She noticed a few people holding hands, nodding slightly, moved by the unexpected performance. Her heart swelled with a mixture of relief and pride. She had worried that a simple tune would not make a difference, but now she could feel its quiet power. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence, flowing naturally as she let the melody guide her. The music was not complicated, but it had a story, a rhythm that reflected moments of hope and sadness, joy and longing. She thought of the times she had played alone in her room, her music echoing against the walls, comforting her in ways words never could. Now, it was no longer just her music. It belonged to everyone in the hall for these few minutes, and the thought made her smile softly. The audience began to respond in subtle ways. Some nodded, others closed their eyes, lost in thought. A man in the front row tilted his head, listening intently, as if trying to understand the story behind the notes. A young girl held her mother's hand tightly, mesmerized by the gentle rise and fall of the melody. The quiet attentiveness of the crowd surprised her. She had expected at least a few skeptical faces, maybe some disinterested looks, but instead, she felt a connection forming, a shared moment that transcended words. Her simple plea, her small act of courage, was reaching people in ways she had never imagined. She played on, letting the melody grow slightly more complex while still maintaining its simplicity. Her fingers danced lightly over the keys, guided by emotion rather than technique. She realized that the music did not need to be perfect to be powerful. It only needed to be honest. Each note carried a piece of her story, and she could see, even in the dimly lit hall, that the audience was beginning to understand it. Some faces reflected surprise, some joy, some quiet contemplation, but all were touched in some way. The connection she felt was mutual. The music flowed from her to them, and in turn, their attention and emotion seemed to guide her fingers even more confidently. As she continued, she felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced before. The nervousness that had gripped her when she first approached the piano melted away, replaced by a calm determination. She played not for recognition or approval, but because she could not keep the music inside her any longer. Each chord, each soft trill, each pause carried her feelings into the room, and she could feel the audience absorbing them. She had stepped into a space filled with strangers, yet she felt as if she were speaking directly to each person through the language of music. The hall was completely silent now, the usual noises of shuffling, whispering, and coughing replaced by the steady presence of her melody. She noticed a few people leaning forward, some with tears glistening in their eyes, others simply smiling, lost in thought. The simplicity of the music had captured their attention in a way that no flashy performance could have. She realized that people often forget the beauty of something straightforward and sincere, something that comes from the heart rather than from practice or showmanship. Her music was not about impressing anyone. It was about sharing a piece of herself, and that honesty resonated deeply. She let the melody take her further, exploring subtle shifts in rhythm and tone. There were quiet moments where the music almost whispered, followed by gentle rises that seemed to carry emotion into every corner of the hall. She could feel the audience leaning in, drawn by the honesty and delicacy of the performance. Some faces reflected relief, as if the music had reached places they had not even realized needed attention. Others reflected curiosity, surprise, and awe at the courage it took for someone to step forward in such a setting with nothing but a simple plea and a melody. With each passing minute, she felt more connected to the room, more aware of the silent dialogue forming between her music and the listeners. She realized that her simple melody had become a bridge, linking her personal experience with the experiences of the audience. The music allowed them to pause, to breathe, to feel something that was not part of their busy lives. She played on, savoring each note, each pause, each delicate movement that carried emotion without words. The power of simplicity became clearer to her with every chord. She noticed subtle reactions in the audience. A man in the back leaned forward, nodding slightly as if understanding something unspoken. A woman near the front closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, letting the music fill her senses. A child shifted in her seat, mesmerized by the sound and motion of the pianist's hands. The room, which had once been filled with restless energy, was now completely absorbed in the moment. She felt a sense of awe at the transformation she had helped create. Her small request, a simple plea to play, had led to something far greater than she had ever imagined. Time seemed to stretch and compress at once. Minutes felt like seconds, and yet every second carried weight and importance. She played with care, letting each note linger in the air, giving it space to resonate with the audience. She realized that the quiet moments, the pauses between notes, were just as powerful as the notes themselves. It was in the silence that people could reflect, absorb, and connect with the music. Her simple melody had created a space for contemplation, a shared experience that would linger in the memory of everyone present. As she neared the end of her piece, she felt a mix of anticipation and gentle sorrow. She did not want the moment to end, but she also knew that every performance must conclude. She allowed the final notes to fade softly, letting them linger in the hall before vanishing completely. For a moment, there was perfect stillness, an almost reverent pause as the audience absorbed what they had just experienced. Then, slowly, whispers of appreciation began to spread, followed by nods, soft smiles, and quiet exhalations. The transformation was complete. The audience, once distracted and impatient, had been captivated and moved by a simple act of courage and sincerity. She sat back for a moment, letting herself breathe and taking in the subtle reactions around her. The stage manager nodded approvingly, a quiet acknowledgement of the unexpected impact of her small plea. She had not aimed for recognition or applause, yet the audience's response was a testament to the power of honesty, vulnerability, and courage. She realized that the simplest gestures often have the greatest effect, that sharing a piece of oneself with the world can create connections stronger than any grand performance. Her simple melody had become a quiet, profound statement of courage, emotion, and the human experience. She finally stood and stepped away from the piano, her heart full, her mind alive with the awareness of what had just occurred. The audience's attention remained, now tinged with appreciation, curiosity, and wonder. She felt a quiet pride, not for the attention, but for the act of stepping forward, of daring to share a small part of herself with strangers who had received it with openness and respect. The music had created a moment, a bridge between her inner world and the hearts of those listening. And in that moment, she understood the true power of her simple plea, a small act of courage that had resonated far beyond what she had imagined. She took another deep breath, feeling the warmth of the moment settle around her. The hall was still quiet, but there was an unmistakable shift in energy. The audience had stopped being a passive collection of strangers. They had become participants in something delicate and shared. Her music had opened a small window, and now everyone could see the world through it for just a few minutes. She let her fingers hover over the keys, thinking about what she wanted to convey next. It wasn't about showing off skill or impressing anyone. It was about connection, about speaking directly to hearts without words. As her fingers touched the keys again, the melody grew more expressive. Each note carried a small story, a fragment of emotion she had carried for years. She had learned that the power of music was not in complexity but in honesty. When a person played with heart, the audience could feel it whether they understood the technical aspects or not. She saw the faces before her, some smiling softly, others lost in thought, some with eyes glistening. It was as if the music had created a safe space for all of them to feel, to reflect, and to connect. She let herself be fully present in the moment. Her movements were gentle, deliberate, and guided by emotion. The music rose and fell naturally, mirroring the ebb and flow of her own feelings. She imagined each note reaching someone in the audience personally, speaking to their joys, their fears, their hidden hopes. She had never felt so vulnerable in public, yet the vulnerability felt empowering. Every subtle glance, every small sigh, every quiet shift of the audience reminded her that what she offered was being received in the way she had hoped. The hall remained hushed, the quiet not uncomfortable but intimate. She noticed a few people leaning forward, eyes fixed on her hands, as if they could follow each delicate movement of her fingers. Others had their eyes closed, letting the music wash over them, feeling it resonate in their chests. She felt the unusual thrill of performing for people who were not just observers but part of the moment she was creating. The energy was soft yet powerful, like a wave that spread gently across the audience, touching each person in a unique way. Her melody began to explore gentle contrasts, soft, reflective moments giving way to slightly bolder phrases. The transitions were subtle, almost conversational, like she was sharing little thoughts and seeing how the audience would respond. She could sense smiles, small nods, and quiet appreciation in the gestures around her. Even the people who had seemed distracted before were now completely absorbed. They had become a part of the experience simply by listening, by allowing themselves to feel. She realized that the music had bridged the gap between her private world and theirs, creating an invisible bond that required no words. The piano became an extension of herself, an instrument through which she could communicate everything she had struggled to express in life. She thought about all the moments she had kept quiet, moments when she wished she could speak or reach out but did not. The music was different. It had no barriers, no judgments, no hesitation. Each note was an invitation to the audience to enter her world, even if only briefly. The idea of sharing something so intimate with so many strangers was both frightening and exhilarating, but she knew it was exactly what she needed to do. Her melody continued to evolve, carrying a sense of gentle storytelling. The simplicity of the tune allowed people to interpret it in their own way. Some might think of personal memories, others might feel emotions they had not expected to experience in a concert hall. She felt a profound sense of satisfaction knowing that her music had sparked something beyond herself, that it had created ripples in the hearts of those listening. It was a quiet power, the kind that didn't announce itself but grew steadily in the minds and hearts of the audience. She noticed the subtle signs of engagement all around her. A man in the middle rows had his head slightly tilted, eyes following her hands as if they could see the thoughts behind each note. A young couple held hands, their fingers entwined, feeling the music as a shared experience. A woman near the front sat with her eyes closed, breathing slowly and evenly, as though letting the piano carry away some invisible burden. These small gestures were powerful confirmations that her simple plea to play had transformed into something far larger and more meaningful than she had imagined. As she played on, her confidence deepened. There was no fear of judgment anymore, only the flow of emotion guiding her fingers. She allowed herself to explore dynamics, soft, tender passages followed by slightly more forceful chords that emphasized the peaks of emotion in the music. The audience responded subtly, shifting in their seats, leaning closer, becoming fully present. The shared silence that filled the hall felt almost sacred, a collective breath held between every note. She marveled at how a simple melody, offered with sincerity, could have such a profound impact. Time seemed to slow down. Minutes became moments, and moments became memories that she could feel building in real time. The quiet attentiveness of the crowd was a mirror to her own focus and presence. She was no longer just playing music. She was participating in a human experience that extended far beyond herself. She could see the invisible thread connecting her to the audience, a line formed of empathy, curiosity, and quiet joy. Each note reinforced that bond, creating a moment in which everyone present was united, however briefly, by something pure and honest. The hall was a vessel for emotion, carrying her small, personal melody far beyond what she had expected. She realized that she had always underestimated the impact of simplicity, the strength in honesty, and the courage it took to step forward with nothing but her own truth. Music had allowed her to say what words could not, and the audience had not only listened but responded in kind. There was a mutual exchange, an unspoken conversation between her and every person present, a dialogue that required nothing but attention and openness. She allowed herself to be fully absorbed in the music, letting each note resonate and fade naturally. There was a rhythm to it, a pulse that mirrored the emotions rising inside her. She could feel her heart beating in sync with the melody, a gentle harmony that connected her physical presence with the emotional reach of the music. The audience, too, seemed to be caught in this rhythm, breathing with the pauses, leaning with the crescendos, letting the music guide their own experience. Her performance continued to unfold, each moment more intimate than the last. She was aware of the power of the space she had created, a moment of stillness and attention that belonged to everyone, yet originated entirely from her small, humble plea to play. She realized that people often longed for these moments, moments where they could truly feel and connect, moments that broke the monotony of schedules, expectations, and distractions. Her simple act had given them that, even if they didn't consciously realize it. Finally, she began to bring the melody to a close. She softened the notes, letting them fade slowly into silence, letting the room absorb the end of the story. She felt a gentle sadness at the conclusion, a desire to prolong the connection she had forged. Yet she also felt a deep sense of satisfaction and completion. The audience, having been so quietly captivated, was now taking a collective breath, as if they had been holding onto something fragile and beautiful. The silence that followed was heavy with appreciation, reverence, and the subtle acknowledgement of what had occurred. The first signs of reaction appeared, soft and gradual. A few people exhaled audibly, some smiled quietly, others nodded, still taking in the experience. The energy of the hall was transformed. It was warmer, quieter, more thoughtful. Her small, sincere plea to play had evolved into a shared experience, a moment of connection that transcended the usual expectations of a concert hall. She felt a quiet pride, not in the attention she received, but in the fact that she had dared to step forward and share something deeply personal with strangers who had responded with openness. She rose slowly from the piano, letting the final resonance fade completely, and took a small step back. The stage manager gave her a subtle nod of approval, acknowledging the courage and effect of her actions. The audience, though no longer in complete silence, was now thoughtful and attentive, their previous impatience replaced by quiet respect and warmth. She understood that her simple melody had done more than fill the space with sound. It had filled hearts with emotion, curiosity, and a fleeting sense of connection. Her small, humble plea had become something far greater than she had ever imagined, and she carried the quiet triumph within herself, knowing that she had created a moment that would linger in the minds and hearts of everyone present for a long time. She stood quietly for a moment, letting the final notes of her melody fade completely into the air. The hall was no longer just a place filled with seats and strangers. It felt alive with the shared experience she had created. The audience was still, but not in the tense, restless way it had been at the beginning. Their attention had shifted, their energy softened, and there was a quiet respect in the room that she could feel even without looking directly at anyone. She allowed herself a small, relieved smile, knowing that the simple act of asking to play had blossomed into something far more powerful than she had imagined. She stepped away from the piano, her fingers tingling from the motion, and looked out at the audience. She noticed the subtle changes in posture and expression. Some people were leaning forward slightly, as if reluctant to let the moment end. Others had their eyes closed, still carrying the music in their minds. A few were wiping away tiny tears or holding hands with companions in quiet acknowledgement of the emotions stirred. She had only asked to share a small melody, yet the impact was profound. She realized that courage, even in small doses, could ripple outward and touch lives in unexpected ways. The stage manager approached her with a gentle smile, quietly nodding in approval. He had been skeptical at first, worried about schedules and audience expectations. Yet he could see the difference her music had made. He did not need words to convey it. The expressions on the audience's faces said everything. She thanked him softly, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. It was not about receiving accolades or recognition, but about knowing that she had stayed true to herself and offered something real. She had risked stepping into a space where she could have been ignored, and instead, she had created connection. As she moved toward the exit of the stage, she noticed audience members beginning to react. Gentle applause started, hesitant at first, then gradually swelling into more confident clapping. Some people stood, smiling at her with gratitude and admiration. Others whispered to their companions, pointing toward the stage and sharing their surprise at the unexpected performance. She realized that what had begun as a simple plea had become a shared memory, a small but unforgettable moment in the lives of everyone present. Her heart lifted, warmed by the understanding that the simplest gestures could create profound experiences. Walking back toward the wings of the stage, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her fingers were tired, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of performing. Yet the satisfaction was deeper than anything she had experienced before. She thought about the courage it had taken to ask, about the vulnerability of putting herself out there, and about the unexpected reward of seeing people respond with genuine emotion. The experience had taught her that true connection did not require skill or perfection, only honesty, openness, and the willingness to take a small risk. In the audience, the mood had shifted completely. People who had been restless or distracted at the beginning were now attentive and reflective. She had created a pause in the normal rhythm of life, a moment where people could feel something real and simple, something that spoke directly to their hearts without pretense. She had witnessed the quiet power of music, how it could create bonds and touch lives in ways that words alone could not. Her small plea, once filled with uncertainty and doubt, had led to a collective experience that would linger long after the hall emptied. She thought back to the many times she had played alone at home, unsure if anyone would ever hear or care. Those quiet, solitary moments had been private, yet they had prepared her for this one opportunity. She realized that even the smallest acts of practice, patience, and persistence could culminate in something meaningful. The courage to act, even when the odds seemed small, could create extraordinary outcomes. In that moment, she understood the true value of sincerity and bravery, and how they could ripple outward to touch others. The applause grew louder, echoing softly off the high ceilings. People were clapping with a newfound appreciation, some even rising from their seats, unable to contain the joy and admiration they felt. She had not intended to impress anyone or gain fame. She had simply wanted to share something personal and honest. Yet the response was more than acknowledgement. It was a celebration of vulnerability and authenticity. She felt gratitude for the audience, for their openness, and for the invisible connection that had formed between them. The simple melody she had offered had created a shared experience that transcended expectations. As she prepared to leave the stage, she allowed herself one last glance. At the piano, it had been more than an instrument. It had been a voice for her feelings, a medium through which she could reach others. She realized that the courage to ask, the willingness to be seen, and the honesty of her expression had created something far greater than she could have imagined. Music had given her a way to connect, to communicate, and to touch lives in a meaningful way. The memory of this moment would stay with her forever, a reminder of the quiet but powerful impact of sincerity. Backstage, she felt a gentle release of tension. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a soft sense of peace. She had stepped forward, shared her music, and witnessed its effect. She knew that this was not the end of her journey with music, but a milestone, a reminder that even small gestures could have far-reaching consequences. Her simple plea, once a tentative request, had grown into a testament to the power of honesty and courage. She thought about the people in the audience, their faces illuminated by the soft light, their reactions genuine and unguarded. She had given them a gift, and in return, they had given her something equally precious, the acknowledgement of her courage, the reception of her honesty, and the shared experience of beauty and emotion. She realized that the act of giving, of sharing something meaningful without expectation of reward, could create a cycle of connection and gratitude that extended far beyond the moment itself. The sound of applause continued, mingled with whispers of admiration and surprise. She felt a quiet joy, knowing that her music had touched the hearts of people she had never met. It was a moment of human connection, raw and simple, yet profound. She had entered a space filled with strangers, taken a risk, and discovered the power of vulnerability. The lesson was clear. Even the smallest, most sincere gestures could ripple outward, leaving a lasting impression on the world. She left the stage slowly, savoring the feeling of accomplishment. Each step was filled with awareness, each breath a reminder of the courage it had taken to speak, to play, and to share. She knew that the audience would carry this memory with them, just as she would carry the experience in her heart. The music, the silence, the attention, and the connection had all merged into a singular, unforgettable moment. She smiled softly, grateful for the opportunity, for the audience, and for the quiet but undeniable proof that honesty and courage could touch lives in ways that nothing else could. As she walked away from the stage and toward the exit, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the quiet hours of practice at home to the nervous approach to the stage, every step had been a preparation for this one act of bravery. She had learned that sincerity could speak louder than skill, that vulnerability could create connections stronger than performance, and that a simple plea, when offered honestly, could resonate far beyond its modest beginnings. In that hall, among strangers, she had discovered the true power of music, courage, and human connection. She stepped into the hallway outside the stage, the sounds of conversation and movement gently returning to her ears. The audience would eventually leave, each person carrying the memory of her simple melody, and she would return to her own life, changed subtly but significantly by the experience. She understood that this was the beauty of honesty, the magic of sharing a piece of oneself without expectation. She had asked for a small opportunity, and in return, she had created something unforgettable, a quiet miracle of human connection that would remain with her and those who listened for a long time.